So it's about politics. It's about not wanting to go to Pakistan from that kind of reason. It's really about politics.
You still have more improvement you can do on your own, regardless of coach.
Pakistan hasn't had a Virat Kohli in the last 10 years, right? Babar Azam was close, but emotionally, Babar Azam is not as important to Pakistan as Virat Kohli was to India. And yet,
of course,
he could be relieved of the captaincy and the world kept turning. Pat Cummins is not more special than Nasim Shah. Pat Cummins is not more special than Shaheen Afridi. He's not more clutch than them. He's professional. What was he doing during those 6 years? He worked on his batting so that he could make his batting handy. MS Dhoni is like the most genius, pragmatic person we've ever seen in cricket. Like, he's so pragmatic of like, oh, I'm not even going to try and chase this total because it's too high. So if you want to keep picking captains out of your butt, right, and hoping that you find another Misbah or another Imran Khan, you probably will. When people say to me, oh, who should take over Pakistan cricket? I say, it doesn't matter who takes it over. It matters that there is a whole professional system underneath. I think the media is a huge problem. It's way too reactionary. It's way too unprofessional.
With the debate on foreign coaches, right? This concept, oh, they'll come live in Pakistan. It's tough for them to live in Pakistan. I understand that.
Who are the great coaches? Where are the coaches in Pakistan? What is a great coach?
Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to another episode of How Does It Work, a podcast by Pro Pakistani. We have a very, very interesting guest today. The cricket analyst Jarrod Kimber is on. Firstly, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
No worries, thanks for having me.
Okay, so before I get into Pakistan cricket and everything that I want to understand from you, I wanted to start with something that's kind of fresh and something that I guess personally is bothering me. The ICC Champions Trophy, right? So we're being told now that India will not come to Pakistan. And what's going to happen is that apparently Mohsin Naqvi is not agreeing to a hybrid model. So there are talks of it going to South Africa. I wanted to get your thoughts on... I understand that cricket is run by India. That's okay. But I mean, for us as Pakistanis, now we've had Australia and England and everybody tour Pakistan, and the safety security situation is relatively better. But maybe I'm being biased here, but I just feel like we deserve an ICC event. I've never seen one. There was one in 1996, but I was 4 then. So I didn't really, I don't have any memories of it. But what are your thoughts on all of this?
Yeah, it's not really about safety, is it? Because it's isn't it the Indian blind side is in Pakistan at the moment, and we've seen Pakistan team, Indian officials and all sorts travel to Pakistan at times. It's really about politics, right? This is the major figurehead group of India, and BJP is incredibly involved in Indian cricket at the moment on almost every level. So it's about politics. It's about not wanting to go to Pakistan from that kind of reason. It was never going to happen. No one really ever believed it was going to happen. The ICC, when they organised this, I think maybe there was a small fraction of the people in the ICC who thought, oh, okay, I think we could convince them. And it's like, but I think the vast majority of people in the ICC knew it wasn't going to happen. So it's a bit silly now to suddenly say you're not going to have a hybrid tournament when that's all this was ever going to be in the first place. Like, no one ever really, truly expected India to go to Pakistan here. That's a separate argument to what you're talking about, which is you're a cricket fan, and you're a Pakistani cricket fan, and Pakistan has played a big role in the development of cricket and should be allowed to host major events. But that's not the world we live in. There's lots of things that people deserve that they don't get, right? And this is just one of them.
No, that's fair. But one of the
if
things
is
all
the ills in the world, this is probably further down the list than some of the others.
Fair enough. But what I always think is, and obviously he's not going to be watching this, but I mean, Virat Kohli and Rohit Sharma are at the end of their careers, right? And it's just so crazy that two of the biggest cricketers of all time have not played. So when I was a kid, I think it was 2005 or 6 the last time they toured here. And that game in Rawalpindi, we won that game and we lost the series. It was the craziest thing. I mean, I was talking to someone that day. I think Michael Vaughan said that if you wanted to revive Test cricket, just do a 5-match Pakistan-India series and, Test cricket is back. I was just thinking, from a fan perspective, I get what you're saying, but these superstars that you can create and the emotions that can happen, we won't get to see. Fair enough. I mean, what that's politics and that's what it is. What do you think the Pakistan Cricket Board should do? Should they, if it's in South Africa, there's talks of boycotting? I don't know. I mean, in a sense, we are the defending champions. So what does Pakistan do in all of this? What would you advise them to do?
It's hard without being in some of those meetings, so it'd be very interesting to know exactly what is happening within the meetings. I think if I was Pakistan, what I would be saying is that's fine if they don't want to come and travel here and play against us, but that means they forfeit the points. And that we're not going to play an India-Pakistan game. But think about what that means.
Yeah, for the revenue,
the Champions
right?
Trophy only really exists for that game. And for Pakistan to turn around and go, okay, well, we've scheduled it at home and we're not going to play it. I think that's a much better play than if it goes to South Africa. We're going to forfeit it. It was always going to be split between two venues, as I said before. But if Pakistan wanted to play a card, that's the one card that's the only card they have in cricket, is that game.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so if you actually want to do it, this whole idea of moving it around or whatever is got nothing to do with anything. If you're talking purely, we have had Australia, England, West Indies all forfeit World Cup games before for various reasons, for political reasons, for safety reasons, etc., etc. The world went on. The world kept rolling. It didn't split cricket in two, right? None of those things happened. But the opposition got the points, right? Sri Lanka made the 96 World Cup, and the two strongest teams in that tournament were West Indies and Australia, and neither of them traveled to Sri Lanka to play their games, right? So Sri Lanka got bonus points. I still think Sri Lanka was the best team in that tournament, but the second and third best teams were Australia and the West Indies, right? So we've had that happen before. I think that's a much better way of dealing with something like that.
Yeah, I think you were talking about what Pakistan can do in this particular situation when it comes to the Champions Trophy.
So when it comes down to it, it's if they want to play some kind of card here, the card is the India-Pakistan game. And I think that's a far more interesting way of putting it up, because the one thing that Pakistan hasn't really done before is really use their power. The problem with the small boards in general is that they haven't really got together as a group and they haven't really used their power. So there was this whole thing when the big three takeover was happening, right? Where the small boards were like, what do we do? And it was just like, well, there's 7 of you and there's 3 of them, right? So if all 7 of you make a decision together, like we're not going to play in the next World Cup, say, what are those other 3 teams going to do? They're not going to make as much money without you as they are with you. There's a reason why you exist. And that's the same with Pakistan here, right? And so the boycott is probably that. But why boycott the whole tournament? Pakistan fans still want to see Pakistan. Say, we will happily host our part of the tournament at home. You guys can work out whatever you want to do with the rest of the tournament. Any teams who are happy to come over and play games here can play games here. If you want to play the rest of the tournament in Dubai, that's fine. But, you know, the most important thing then separate to that is we have scheduled a game versus India. It is at home. If they don't come, we get the points, and then you guys are going to have to work that out. I think that's a fair thing to say, right? In the same way that Kenya said that, and the same way that Sri Lanka said that. It doesn't really matter if the reason is safety, or if it's politics, or if it's something else. You know, whatever that may be. The game is scheduled in this arena. We have made it as safe as possible. We believe it's safe enough for them to come over. We understand the politics of it, but that's not really our concern because we're a cricket board. I mean, they're not, but you know, let's pretend that it's a cricket board and not, you know, they're not both political boards. But essentially, I think that's a much better one. I don't see the point of moving it to South Africa anyway. This is supposed to be a tournament in Pakistan. If some of the games can't be played in Pakistan, that's fine. We've had many World Cups that have been split between a couple of venues, right? There's no reason why Sri Lanka can't pick up a couple of games, or Bangladesh, or Dubai, or, you know, Oman. I don't know. Yeah. Anywhere in that region couldn't pick up a couple of games. If that's, if that's another way of doing it, that's fine. But yeah, if they really have this issue, I think the bigger thing is don't cheat your home fans out of watching all the games at home that aren't India, right? Either play India in Dubai or whatever, however the tournament is going to go ahead, or play the card. Finally play the card and just say, no, we asked to host this tournament. You guys gave us the rights to host this tournament. We're going to host this tournament, and here we are. Those are the two options. This third one, I don't really understand the point of. But, remember at this stage, it wasn't that long ago that, like, the Women's World Cup had to be changed out of Bangladesh. And I reckon in the space of about a month, we heard 5 different venues, right?
Yeah.
You hear a lot of things at this stage because they don't know what they're doing, right? Like, do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
That's how these things work. And so my guess is that it will probably still go ahead in Pakistan and Dubai as we sit here now. But in a week's time, I could be telling you it's going to go ahead in Zimbabwe, right? Like, anything could happen.
Anything could happen. As long as it's just not like, that Asia Cup that happened a couple of years ago where essentially it was in Sri Lanka. I mean, we got some games, but we got really, meaningless sort of parts of that tournament. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about as well was you mentioned the political or the Pakistan Cricket Board, whatever it might be. So it's come under a lot of criticism in the last couple of years. You've been fairly critical of it as well. And then all of a sudden, call it Akib balls, as Rizwan did. What do you think? How much of this is just luck, and how much of this is a turning over a new leaf with the win with beating England in Pakistan in the Test series, and then obviously we've gone on to win a series in Australia, which we haven't done in a long time, albeit with certain restrictions. The third ODI was played with a lesser team by Australia, but we did win it, right? So we have won 2 back-to-back pretty big.
Should have won all 3 games anyway.
Yeah, to be fair, I think we sort of choked that first one. But what I'm trying to understand is, where do you see Pakistan cricket going with this new change with Akib and with Aleem Dar and with Rizwan, etc.?
I mean, it won't matter anyway, will it? Because in about 3 months, you'll be asking me a question about what it's like for the next person when they're involved. So I'm not going to get too interested in that. Look, the Test match, the Test series come back. I think all credit goes to the players for what they did, and being able to come back from a loss like that in that first Test is absolutely brutal. It's worth saying though that they did get themselves into a very good position in that Test match as well. And the only reason that we remember it so poorly is because of how much that game twisted on them, right? So it wasn't as if they started playing that series bad. They scored over 500 runs in the first innings of that series. So the second Test is a little bit luck of a draw. I think if they'd lost the toss, that was if you play 2 Tests on the same wicket, the toss is probably doubly important. And in that particular game, from what I saw of it, and I think the India-New Zealand game overlapped with it a little bit, but, I spent a fair bit of time watching it as well. It just seemed to me that was a toss-dependent game. So would you be asking that question if England had won the toss in that Test match? Probably not. England probably win 2-1. And then Pakistan might still have won the third Test. It wouldn't have gone anywhere. So that's not a sustainable model, is it? Playing back-to-back Tests on the same ground. I think, obviously, certainly in the off-spinner, they found a very good player, but it's not a full... they weren't winning Test matches with 4 bowlers, were they? Winning Test matches with 2 bowlers. That's not a sustainable model. Playing back-to-back matches on the same pitch is not a sustainable model. They went up against an England team that at the moment doesn't play spin particularly well and doesn't bowl spin particularly well, and their best spinner actually played really poorly in that series as well. So what happens when teams who can play spin better and can bowl spin better turn up? Well, that's not a sustainable. Do you know you see where I'm going with this? Like, I'm looking for sustainability. I'm looking for something that is repeatable. I didn't see anything in that series that was repeatable. The one thing I like is that if you look back at the last little while, they've tried really flat pitches. That didn't work. They tried seam bowling pitches for Bangladesh. That didn't work. They went back to a flat pitch again. I know some of that is just it's a naturally flat pitch, but they went back to a flat pitch. And then after that, they tried spin. I like that. At least they're trying something. In a short period of time, we saw 3 vastly different situations.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, to me, look like a consistent model that is going to work over a period of time. The ODIs in Australia is a little bit different. And you can almost take that out from that. But that's a good sign. But I'm not... I can't imagine that the problem is if you win these 2 series, and then let's say they lose the next 2 series after this, so they lose a limited over series, then they lose a test series after this. Does that mean that same group that you just talked about, the Akib ball, right, group, does that mean that suddenly is crap again? That it's useless and that we should, do you know what I mean? So you can't over-index. And the problem is that the framing of the question is already wrong. Is this new group doing great things because they won this series, they won this ODI? No. Are we doing sustainable things that are good for our cricket? Should be the question. And in Pakistan, it's always, is this guy a hero? Is this guy a villain? And if you start from that, you're always going to find a reason to, boost someone up and then bring someone down.
Do you think it's definitely a Pakistan problem? Maybe it's a subcontinental problem where we have a very reactionary fan base, but we have a very, we have a messiah complex. And I don't mean cricket. I mean everything. I mean either Imran Khan is the hero of all heroes or he's the villain. And X or Y, we either love our military or we hate our military. It's one of those situations where we've almost always lived in that environment. Even if you look at cricket, right? We always look at, if we just had a captain like Dhoni or a captain like Imran, we would, rise again. Now Rizwan is the greatest captain ever because he's won 2 games. He'll be the worst captain again. And sometimes I wonder, when you talk about sustainability, I understand that in the West, you're in London right now, but even in Australia and other parts of the world, there's a very process-oriented system, right? And no matter who is in power, be that in cricket or in politics, it's the same thing. Whereas in Pakistan, even to some extent in India, it's very reactionary. Like when you mentioned India and New Zealand, right? I started watching Indian media, obviously all Pakistanis do when India loses. And they were all like, Bumrah is finished. He can't. I mean, Bumrah might be the best bowler I've seen since Wasim Akram. And we'll get to that. But the idea is we do have a messiah complex. And then we do have all of these cultural issues, if you want to call them that, or Pakistan-centric issues. And then I wonder, with the debate on foreign coaches, right? This concept, they'll come live in Pakistan. It's tough for them to live in Pakistan. I understand that. But where do you stand on all this? I mean, should we look for a new formula that suits us, considering we're unable to adopt meritocracy? As in what you're saying is just good process, meritocracy, good team. I know it sounds simple and that is the right answer. The problem is a lot of the time in Pakistan, you just don't get to that answer, right? So should we look at ourselves for another solution?
It's funny that you say that because you mentioned India once or twice in that, right?
Yeah.
Virat Kohli was forced out as captain.
Yeah.
But Indian cricket still tried to, as much as possible, and they've made some errors, and BCCI is certainly not perfect, but they have tried to make sure that there is a constant path through underage cricket all the way up to the Indian side. They got a legend to coach the underage team in Rahul Dravid, right? Who was coaching the A team and everything else. There was a clear pathway. If you do well in domestic cricket, you will come into our pathway system, and then we will try and identify a role that you might be able to do at international level, right? There's still some issues, as we said before. There was some political maneuvering, I think, when Virat Kohli was pushed out at a certain point, but also I think Virat Kohli was kind of perhaps, looking for not a way out, but I think he was looking to just go back and be a player again rather than just, the leader and everything else. But they had pathways in place and they had structures in place. And so even when there was the chaos of an absolute, Pakistan hasn't had a Virat Kohli in the last 10 years, right? Babar Azam was close. But emotionally, Babar Azam is not as important to Pakistan as Virat Kohli was to India, and yet,
of course,
he could be relieved of the captaincy, and the world kept turning, right? So, yes, I agree with you that there are structural issues within the way that Pakistan works as a society. I think the media is a huge problem. It's way too reactionary. It's way too unprofessional. It's way too biased. I mean, the fact that up until recently, Pakistani cricket correspondents, it might still happen, when they travelled, would be paid for by the PCB. It's like, well, that's not particularly a good system to have, is it? Right? Do you know what I mean? If you're
Fair enough.
The first time any non-Pakistani cricket journalist hears that, they snap their head around and go, "What? You get paid by the PCB to travel? Well, how can you be objectionable and talk about this environment?" So there are issues, as you said, the Messiah complex, the lack of stability. I mean, while we were recording this, you went. You had a power outage, right? There are problems that Pakistan have that island cricket is never going to have, right?
Right.
But there is a basic fundamental truth, which is if you keep looking for heroes, you're going to find a lot of villains, right? And maybe eventually they'll stumble along to some genius, right, who'll be able to string together a little bit of success. But I'm going to go back to the same word I said before. Is it sustainable? So if you want to keep picking captains out of your butt, right, and hoping that you find another Misbah or another Imran Khan, you probably will, right? There are enough talented people in Pakistan that you're going to find that. But does that matter if you don't have a system where the best players are looked after emotionally, mentally, physically, with diets coming up? If they're going up against other cricket boards that are doing that, right? If you don't get all the little things right, you are at that stage. It's not that you're searching for a messiah. You literally desperately need a messiah, right? And the problem with people like that is, and I'm not having a go at Imran or Misbah because I think they're both very interesting people, and certainly from a cricket perspective, very respectable people. Imran's politics probably a little bit different than mine, but and I don't know what Misbah's politics are. But when you look at what they did, they did it in an era that was slightly different, right? And as we go on, it is harder and harder to just pluck a bit of magic out of the air and suddenly make everything work. You have to make sure that, I don't know, let's say Shaheen's knee doesn't come back. There has to be a structure to actually get him to a position where maybe he doesn't play a lot for the next 2 or 3 years, but that you can rehab him so that when he does come back, he's actually close to Shaheen Afridi again, right? Rather than just going, it's okay, we'll find another Shaheen Afridi. That doesn't work, right? It's been proven in cricket history, right? Like when Australia did it with Dennis Lillee. Australia literally had Dennis Lillee and they were just like, oh, we'll find another Dennis Lillee. Well, they did about 30 years later, right? Like Glenn McGrath comes on 25 years after Dennis Lillee, right? So if Dennis Lillee hadn't come back on his own, they would miss out. You can't be in that situation when you're going up against the machinery of the IPL in India and the amount of people that are there, the sort of surgical precision of what English cricket does, right? The lifestyle of Australian cricket and how Australian cricket works, right? That's who you're going up against to win major tournaments. That's who you're going up against to be one of the best teams in the world. How do you expect to do that when your players don't have access to proper dietary systems, right? So you say to me, oh, in Pakistan, it's hard to do these things. It's not hard to eat properly, right? You know how to eat properly, right? It's not hard. It's not like I deal with Pakistani business people and entrepreneurs and professionals all the time. They're as professional as anyone I've ever dealt with, right? The idea that there aren't professional people in Pakistan is lunacy. There is an element of the way that the country is run, and specifically cricket within the country is run. It is used as a political tool. So that's never going to go away. But that's happening in India, right? India still makes sure that players have contracts, domestic players have contracts. People know what you have to do to get to a certain level. There is a pathway that makes sense within Indian cricket, even if it's not perfect. And the whole of east of India isn't even playing professional cricket when they probably should be, right? Even when that happens, there is something that is working within that system to try and make sense of what is a chaotic world, right? And it's a chaotic thing. And India and Pakistan, these are countries that shouldn't exist, right? I would say most countries shouldn't exist, but that's a different argument. But these are countries where there's different ethnic groups have been forced together by random borders, right? That you guys had nothing to do with. Right? It was literally old English dudes with big mustaches drawing wiggly lines in different places, right? And you have to deal with that when it comes to health, education, technology, cricket. It doesn't matter. And you are being forced into something that doesn't always fit. And I get that. And it's horrendous. And it's a very hard thing to be able to handle. But there are simple things that you can always do behind the scenes. And when people say to me, oh, who should take over Pakistan cricket? I say, it doesn't matter who takes it over. It matters that there is a whole professional system underneath. So that even if you keep cycling through your random big star coach, overseas coach, big star coach, overseas coach, the actual system and machinery of Pakistan cricket should be running professionally.
No, I agree with that. But one of the things I sometimes wonder, and you mentioned, and it's a good point, that you meet Pakistani entrepreneurs and you meet very professional Pakistani people who, are successful or professional despite the environment. Now, I'm not taking away from the fact that we all know that PCB is a bad situation in general. But I do sometimes, when it comes to fitness, I'm just not talking about everything else. Fitness specifically. Sometimes the players also, I wonder, right? You mentioned how hard is it to eat right. YouTube, Google, even if you can't afford a trainer, which a lot of these guys are on decent salaries, they can. My problem is sometimes I also think the current Pakistani team, how hard is it to, for example, be able to run that too? There's that fantastic podcast with Virat Kohli where he talks about looking in the mirror and, realizing that he needed to make a change and that there was a long-term effect of that. And then I sometimes wonder when I look at our cricketers, look, I get it. We've been dealt maybe a bad hand. I'm not denying that. I'm just saying you still have more improvement you can do on your own, regardless of coach, regardless of captain, regardless of environment. And I'm not pointing the finger at the players. I'm just saying that certain bits they're also responsible for. Would you agree with that?
If you went through player by player, yes. If you're talking players as a group, no. Right? I'm sure there are smart enough players. I think there are smart enough players that you're right, that could have gone off and got themselves incredibly fit. Maybe studied other sports or other cricketers within the sport to understand how to be more professional and gone off and done that. But if you're talking about a group of players, have you ever worked for a really bad organization, like an organization that just doesn't work, right? You become part of that even when you hate it, right? You become the person who doesn't clean up the floor, right? Because why would you clean up the floor? Because the other guy didn't clean up the floor, right? That other guy got promoted and he didn't do any work. That woman over there, she doesn't know what she's doing at all. She has no qualifications. She is, in the same job that I'm in. Why would I try harder, right? Why would I do anything else? There's an element of that. And I remember Michael Holding saying to me once that players are children and the board is parents, right? And so it's really easy to go, kids don't care anymore and all this sort of stuff. And no one ever goes, well, are the parents bringing them up correctly? It's the parents' role to try and get them into the right situation, to teach them and everything else. And you talk about going on Google and everything else. When players go online, do they know what to search? Do they know the right terms to go up to? Or they end up with some sort of weird, I don't know, trad mum diet thing where they only eat eggs. Do you know what I mean? You have to know. Chaminda Vaas, when he became bowling coach in Sri Lanka, the first thing he said to all the guys was, how much protein are you eating? Right? Because Chaminda Vaas played around the world. He looked into this and he was probably a 45-year-old guy at this point. And he knew what he needed. And all the players, some of the players in that meeting were like, what's protein? So how do they know what to Google to get the right thing? I remember being in the West Indies and seeing these guys drink rum and Coke and just saying, why are you drinking Coke? Just drink Diet Coke. Just drink Coke Zero. Just drink Pepsi Max. Right? It's like there's eight teaspoons of sugar in a can of Coke. If you want sugar in your food, fine, eat some fruit or, put some sugar in your cereal or however you want to have your sugar. But if you're at a bar and you're having 10 rum and Cokes on your night off, you are having literally half a bag of sugar, right? And they were looking at me like I was making this up, right? These weren't kids. These were professionals who knew what they were doing. So there is an element of all that sort of stuff. You have to learn those sorts of things. I didn't know those things at 22, 24, 27. And I'm sure there's a lot of Pakistani cricketers who are around the age of 27, 28, 30, 32 actually do start to get a little bit fitter, actually do start to understand what professionalism means and everything else. It's too late by then, Sean.
Fair
do you
enough.
understand what I mean? It's way too late by then. And then it doesn't matter. That doesn't help anything unless the next 20-year-old comes in and does that. It's the underage group teams that you really want to be able to do this. This is why you eat this food. This is why you eat this food. What is your diet at home? Great. We're going to try and come up with a diet that matches that, but can get the most out of your performance. What is your mental health routine? Oh, you've never heard of mental health before. Great. We're going to explain this. How about just writing a diary, right? 3 lines a day on how you feel every day. You never have to show another human being this at all. okay, we're going to get you with a therapist. We understand that culturally you haven't dealt with a lot of therapists. From where you're from, maybe therapy isn't a big thing. But we want you to think of it, don't think of it as therapy. Think of it as talking to someone where, again, the conversation isn't going to go anywhere. We want you to come up with a training plan. Your coaches have come up with training plans. You are vaguely familiar with what they are, but you know your game even better than most coaches do. Come here and we'll come up with a training plan. Imagine if every 15 and 16-year-old prospect in Pakistan was trained like this. And you and I both know this is not what is happening, right? I'm not reinventing the wheel here. I'm talking about buying some kids some notebooks, right? And getting one dietitian from each place going, okay, you're from this region. We know that you eat these kinds of foods. We would like you to probably focus more on this side of your diet rather than this side of your diet. And here's why. Explain it to them. Don't just say, don't eat sugar. Don't just say, eat more protein. Explain why, right? We want you to build up muscle in this kind of way, right? These are not revolutionary concepts, right? You know, eating well, I'm sure in all of Pakistan, right? There are mums everywhere and aunties everywhere who are telling their kids to eat better already, right? Like I'm not inventing something that doesn't exist in Pakistan, right? People have notebooks, right? like in Asia, I would say every time I'm in Asia, there are more notebooks around anywhere than anywhere else I've ever been. Like it's a notebook society, right? Beautiful little notebooks.
Fair enough.
So start to use that, right? And then, as you said before, and I think this is the really interesting thing, you don't need to be like New Zealand or Ireland, right? Those are two of the more organized cricket countries, you know, in structures, right?
Sure.
But use what is great about Pakistan to actually improve things, right? The passion in Pakistan is one of the big things. How do we channel that passion, right? But get that same passion, when one of my favorite things in Pakistan cricket is when there's 8 different people out in the middle, all having 8 different conversations with each other, right? How do you get that into the strategy meeting? How do you get that into the dietary meeting? How do you get that into coaching, right? So you suddenly have that passion and all these different people of being like, okay, so today we're going to have a meeting with the top 30 minds in Pakistan cricket and we need to fix this one issue, right? Let's have the meeting today and see what we can come up with it. And you might get 30 different views, right? But you might not. You might end up with, actually, this is something we can do in Pakistan. So let's move that forward.
You spoke about Chaminda Vas and how he had a talk with the younger cricketers, and obviously Rahul Dravid was involved in the setup as well in India. Sometimes I wonder, a part of this last generation was supposed to be groomed by the previous generations, right? So the legends of our game who did travel the world. So, Waqar Younis, Wasim Akram, these people have seen cricket at its highest level. They've won, Wasim has won the World Cup, but the idea is they had a bigger structure and system. And I sometimes wonder, there's a lot of talk about politics and ex-cricketers and them going onto the media and saying things and trying to get back into the team, and that's all fine. But just to give you a microcosm of what I think sometimes, the fact that we have an umpire, Nalim Dar, who's now part of our setup and apparently doing well, and I hope he continues to do well, but it is interesting because that shows you that our ex-cricketers and our current cricketers are unable to come together, right? There's something where either they're holding back information or there's some sort of a rivalry. I don't know. I don't know what goes on within the dressing room, but what I sometimes wonder is, in any other world, I've never heard of this. Maybe I'm wrong. You can correct me. That an umpire or even a ref in football sort of joining the strategic group, it shows a lack of ex-cricketers being able to do that job. And do you think that they have failed us to some extent?
No. And I think, so that conversation comes back to a couple of things. One thing I would say there is, again, listen to the way you're framing it. Have they failed us? Wasim Akram didn't fail you. Wasim Akram was a great cricketer. Is Wasim Akram a great coach? Probably not. Right?
Right.
I can tell you lots of former great players who were not great coaches, right? It isn't within them. Waqar Younis, and I'm basing this on his English, but not a great communicator. Again, is he the ideal person to be a coach? No. I think he has some good coaching skills as well. But also, think of your framing. You keep saying Alim Dar is an umpire. Am I wrong? Wasn't Alim Dar a first-class cricketer?
Fair enough. Yeah, but he didn't play at the international level, right? Yeah.
Okay. Okay, well, Mickey Arthur didn't play at the international level. What did you think of him as a coach?
Yeah, okay, fair enough. That
Do
makes
you know
sense.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Right? There's been lots of people who... Andrew McDonald played, 4 tests and has now won a World Cup, right? Like, I don't think the 4 tests is what made Andrew McDonald a better coach at the international level, yeah?
Yeah, like Jose Mourinho in football, for example, yeah.
Yeah. So, again, that's what I mean. I think the structure of the conversations are wrong, and partly it is. It's so focused in on our legends are letting us down, right? But partly the reason your legends are letting you down is because you're expecting them to be saviors, right? Waqar Younis can probably coach. He would probably be a very handy coach in many different levels. Whether he should be the head coach or not, I'm not sure that fits his person. And I don't know Waqar, but I interviewed him a lot when he was coach. I'm not sure I was sitting there thinking this is a guy who should be head coach, right? Wasim Akram, again, there is knowledge that Wasim Akram has. And I also think Wasim Akram has that kind of gravitas where when he says something, the room stops, right? Like, and so that's really cool. But Curtly Ambrose has that. And I don't really want Curtly Ambrose to be my coach either, right? And Curtly Ambrose and Wasim Akram were absolute genius level players. I don't think I want them to be coaches. I'm not sure I want Glenn McGrath to be my coach either, right? So... When you start to look at it from that perspective, I think you're already going again to the wrong thing. You should be saying, who are the next great coaches in Pakistan? And instead you're going, why aren't the great players great coaches? Right?
Fair enough.
So how many great players become great coaches? We've had a handful, haven't we? Right? I mean, if you look at the history of cricket coaching, Jeff Marsh sort of, and Bob, Jeff Marsh takes over from Bob Simpson, and Australia have this great run under Jeff Marsh. What did Jeff Marsh average in Test cricket? Like 32? 31? Yeah. Like, he wasn't, no one's talking up Jeff Marsh as a great batter, right? Who is he taken over by? John Buchanan. John Buchanan, again, not a great international player, never played international cricket at all, right? Who are the great coaches? Where are the coaches in Pakistan? What is a great coach? Right?
That's a great question, actually. Yeah.
And
how important is the coach to the cricket, to the captain?
Mm-hmm. Well, just before you go ahead, I just want to ask you this. Did you see the Shoaib Malik interview that I did? Me and Bayram did?
Yeah, you and Bayram, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a question that I kept asking him in this, right? And the question I kept asking is, how hard is it to be professional in a system that's amateur? Right? And there's a reason I asked that question twice, right? Because I was very, very clear. It is very hard to become an incredible professional within an amateur system or a chaotic system, right? So all those guys you talked about before come from that era. Like, even when Waqar Younis was playing for Surrey, right? Surrey it wasn't like he was playing for Surrey now, right? With their hyperbaric chambers and their surround sound video processing and all this sort of stuff, right? He was playing for Surrey when it was a pretty amateur club, a club with a lot of money, but not a lot of structure and a lot of anything else, right? He came through that system. Compare that to the Australian cricketers, right? They came through the Australian Institute of Sport, which has come up with technology that is now used in the NFL and basketball, right? And Premier League football, right? The Australian Institute of Sport was so high when you come to sports science and structure, right? At the same time that Australian cricket was shit, right? They weren't doing anything in the 80s when the Australian Institute of Sport came in. Do you know who was good in the 80s? Pakistan, right?
Yeah.
But those players came through those players were learning about diet and preparation and rehab, and downtime, right? When no one in Pakistan when Pakistan cricketers who were better than them weren't getting any of that. So if you're suddenly expecting players who came through the PCB to be the model ideal of who could be someone who runs the PCB now, aren't you just putting garbage in to get garbage out? Do you know what I mean?
Fair.
You're hoping that there's a magic person who was really good. And maybe Shoaib Malik, Shan Masood, those sort of uber professional sort of players, right? Maybe they are. Maybe they transcend it. And you have a situation where they come in and they bring in outside information, right? And they do that. But you're essentially saying to all these guys who played in this chaos that you remember very, very well, to be like, why can't you be more professional when you're a coach?
No, I mean, I think that's a fair argument. And actually, it kind of like sits well with the understanding of Australia, right? So we look at Australia in Pakistan as a reactionary fan base or media or whatever you want to call it. And we look at them and we're like, oh, they produce, these fantastic captains like Ricky Ponting and Pat Cummins, and they somehow have all of these clutch players. But then maybe they're clutch because the system, the growth that they go through over the years allows them to be that way when they eventually get their chance. Whereas in our system,
No, perfect. You just named the perfect cricketer, Pat Cummins. Because Pat Cummins was ruined by Australian cricket, right? He was made to bowl 65 overs in a Sheffield Shield final when he was 18. And he was bowling about 155 kilometres an hour at that stage. And he's never bowled that quick ever again, right? He was an absolute force of nature, and they made him bowl 60 overs in a Sheffield Shield final. And he broke down about, 6 months later. And we didn't see him in Australian cricket for 4 prime ministers, right? It was about 6 years where Australia didn't have Pat Cummins, right? So from the age of 19 to the age of 25, 26, Pat Cummins doesn't play for Australia, right? Now, what did Pat Cummins do during those 6 years off? And what would a Pakistani player of comparable talent have done? A Pakistani player of comparable talent would probably have to go off and try and find work somewhere else. They would probably be rushed back a couple of times to try and prove that they were back. They would probably play some league cricket in England, which is not exactly what they need if their body is falling apart. They probably play some weird competitions in America that no one should be involved in. They'd go to Dubai occasionally and maybe, appear at some hookah bars or some nightclubs or something, right? All that sort of crap that you and I know about that you have to do to maintain it. But if you're a 19-year-old star that was reasonably famous, which Pat Cummins was, you can maybe get some of that stuff. What did Pat Cummins do for those 6 years? There was a machine in the SCG where he could run, right? But it's a weightless machine, so it puts no stress on your body. So he could keep it up, pardon me, he could keep up his cardiovascular training, right, without putting any pressure on his body. He was an ambassador for the Big Bash, right? So he got paid, not just as a player, but separate to that, to be able to bring kids in and be able to one day you can bowl fast like Pat Cummins. He was used as a poster boy because he's a good looking guy, right? Like that makes sense. Australia had a plan for him. Okay, we know he's not ready now, but we know one stage we're happy. We're happy to give him contracts. We're happy to make sure that New South Wales keeps giving him contracts. We're going to keep him involved with our sports science, with our sports medicine team, with our sports fitness teams, all these sorts of things. And so when he comes back, his first test match is in India on the flat. I think it was on the flattest wicket of all time. I think it might have been in Ranchi when he made his comeback, right? And he bowled a slower ball bouncer that got KL Rahul out. It was a slower ball bouncer that was 135 kilometers an hour and bounced out KL Rahul with this ball, right? Because they had spent 6 years waiting for him to get ready and physically make sure that he was ready. A 19-year-old Pakistani bowler of the exact same talent level is not going to get that. Right? They're not going to be treated in the same way, right? Pat Cummins is not more special than Nasim Shah. Pat Cummins is not more special than Shaheen Afridi. He's not more clutch than them. He's professional. What was he doing during those 6 years? He worked on his batting so that he could make his batting handy, right? He's won games for Australia with the bat, whereas that upskilling yourself is not always seen as something that is being done in Pakistan. So he's the perfect cricketer to talk about because Australia tried to ruin him, but then because their system was so well set in the background, they could keep him around for as long as possible. And it doesn't mean Australia hasn't lost out on incredible talents. There's a guy called Bert Cockley who I think plays Major League Cricket. No, actually, he might have played minor league cricket in America last we saw Bert Cockley. But they did everything they could to get Bert Cockley to a situation where if he ever got fit again, he could come back and bowl 90 miles an hour and steam in and be a really handy bowler for them, right? Will Pekoski kept getting hit in the head, right? And was pulled out of almost every single game for concussion. And on top of that, he had mental health issues. Victoria spent years and Australia spent years trying to get him to a position where they could get a guy who could come in and probably open the batting and average 43 to 44 and open the batting for them for the next 10 years, right? Will Pekoski might not have even ended up being a star, but they knew he could be an Australian player, so they invested in him. They gave him time off. They did everything they could to put him in a position to succeed. And in the end, sadly for Will Pucovski and for Australian cricket, it didn't work. These are the things you have to do, because otherwise you're just hoping that the magical 19-year-old is going to work it out for themselves. And that is really hard to do.
No, I think that's fantastic. Actually, I didn't realize the Pat Cummins story. This is a great story, and there's a lot to learn from that, actually. Okay, so one of the other things that I wanted to discuss with you is that there's apparently an Afro-Asian game that's planned, right? And there's a probable Asia 11, which I'll read to you, and then I will ask you some questions about it. So the Asia 11 that's probably going to be the Asia 11 is Gurbaz, Rohit Sharma, Virat Kohli, Babar Azam, Nissanka, Shakib, Hardik Pandya, Hasaranga, Rashid Khan, Bumrah, and Shaheen. Would you make any changes to that team?
Is it a T20 game?
Yeah, so it's unclear. I think it's going to be a T20 game, though.
Yeah. I'm not sure I picked Babar Azam in my T20 team. But that's more a personal preference about the way he plays T20 cricket than anything else. Yeah, I don't know. There's no Nepalese players in that, of course. There's no Oman players in that. So how far out you want to stretch it? Do you know what I mean? Like, is it better to have players from all the Asian countries, or I'm trying to think if there's probably, Sandeep Lamachani is not bowling very well anymore, and obviously he's a little bit controversial himself these days. Oman, Bilal Khan, maybe in peak Bilal Khan days, you'd give him the new ball at the other end and give him a go. But he's probably not quite that bowler anymore. But yeah, of the rest of that team, I think you could come up with a few different variations. Yeah, I think what I would say though is it doesn't matter. What matters is that we're getting back to what cricket should be, which is stuff like that. Like, that's a fun thing, right? Do you know what I mean? And
it's exciting.
And you and I both know, and we've all seen this, right? Indian and Pakistani fans know this in general. These players actually really like each other, right? They have really good relationships off the field. Not all of them, obviously. There are some that hate each other and quite rightly and everything else. And but they have really good relationships. This is for me is just a bonding thing right across. I think Asian cricket over the last 10 years has kind of forgotten that they're all in it together.
Yeah.
Right? So there was a big period of time where that was the thing, right? That Asian cricket, Pilcom. Pakistan, India, Lanka setting up the 1996 World Cup, right? That's what it was about. And, having Asian 11s take on African 11s or, Southern Hemisphere 11s or however you do it, like you come up with many different versions, center 11s.
Variations,
right? That it was something that we just started to do in the 90s a little bit more. And we had that really cool thing that kind of didn't go particularly well, which is in 2006, was it? When the World 11 came to play in Australia. And the World 11 obviously didn't take it that seriously, and Australia took it very seriously. And so it was a bit one-sided and lopsided, right?
I mean, was it that they didn't take it seriously, or was there just Australia was so much better at that time?
No, they definitely didn't take it seriously. And I get that. And look, I understand why they didn't take it seriously. Like, I'm not having a go at anyone. But if it's a world, not a world 11, but if it's an Asian 11 versus, I don't know, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, 11 or something like that, right? Or however you want to put these 11s together, Ireland, Scotland, West Indies, England, Netherlands, right?
Yeah.
However you put those sorts of things together. It's a bit different because then there's going to be players on both sides who are going to be like, I'm just here to have fun and relax a little bit, and it's not as serious as a game. Because those games, it's like, I don't know, if you watch All-Star basketball, they're not playing it like it's a real game, but you're not watching it like it's a real game. You're watching it because LeBron James is about to find, Luka Doncic on the wing, for a 3-pointer, right? And you're just like, this is the best thing I've ever seen. I can't believe I get to see that. That's what these games used to exist for. And if you go back,
100%,
World 11s have been around since the 70s, I want to say, and variations of them. I just think that's something that could be really, really cool. And also, what if you had combined Asian 11s? So I don't know, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh on one side, and India, Nepal, Oman. I'm missing someone. that's good. Oh, Afghanistan on the other side. Like,
Yeah.
you could do, there's so many different things that could be done, that should be done. Cricket is fun. And that team, to me, I'm not going to sit there and say, oh, I wouldn't pick this person, I would pick this person. My more thought, almost instantly is, that sounds fun, let's do that.
Yeah. No, I think all of us would just, you mentioned Babar, and you're right, probably doesn't make a T20 team. That's fair. But I mean, just the sight of watching Kohli and Babar Azam play together for Pakistani or Pakistanis and Indians, that would just be really cool. Or watching, I don't know, Shaheen and Bumrah open the bowling, for example. I mean, that's something, it would be like, when I was a kid, that was crazy, right? This would be insane.
Yeah, like, we never got a lot of those games in Australia. Other than that one tournament I was talking about. But I remember just being like, look at this batting lineup. It's crazy. It's absolutely awesome. And the IPL gives us some of that, right? It does give us a small part of that. But this would be it to the next level, right? Like, I don't really understand why the IPL doesn't have a version of an all-star game at this stage, where they just pick 11 players on one side, 11 players on the other side. And in fact, I think the only league that I know that has done this is the ICL, which was that original rebel league in India, where they had an all-star game, but they didn't have the big name players to pull it off, right? It's just like, with all due respect, I'm watching Chris Harris in an all-star game here. It's not Babar Azam and Virat Kohli, is it? So those sorts of things are fun. And cricket, it's one of the reasons we get into it. It's fun. We started off talking about geopolitics and how it affects, the Champions Trophy, right? And now we're talking about, like, wouldn't it be cool to see Babar and Virat bat together? Of course it would be cool to see them, right? Like, it would be awesome.
Sure.
Wouldn't it be cool to see, I know that team that you had, wouldn't it be cool to see Rashid Khan at one end and Ashwin at the other end? Like, those sorts of things would be absolutely brilliant. And, Sikandar Raza coming in to bat with David Miller and, whichever variations that you have on that. It's fun and it's great.
In the sort of spirit of fun, I also wanted to ask you, if you made your all-time Pakistan ODI 11, who would you put in it and why?
You can't just throw that to me 54 minutes into a chat and expect me to be able to give you any kind of a side.
It's just the first. Look, so let me rephrase that.
I think Wasim Akram would get in.
I mean, I hope so. Yeah, I think so. I mean,
sorry,
he should make it. Yeah, I mean, I feel like Wasim is the first name on the sheet. No.
Yeah. Look, I probably would never be able to give you a team off the top of my head, but yeah, I would probably have Ajmal and Saqlain Mushtaq would probably be my spinners. I'd have Shahid Afridi in there, so I'd have 3 spinners, but I'd have an all-rounder. I would have Imran Khan, Waqar Yunus. Who's that?
Abdul Razak. Does he make your team or no?
I don't know if I need him in this team. If I've got Imran Khan and Shahid Afridi, he was one of my favourite players. So and I've got Wasim Akram as well. So I've got a couple of players with all-round talents already. Syed Anwar's probably opening the batting. Inzi is obviously in the team. Javed Meandad's obviously in the team. So I don't know how many players I have already, but that's probably about 8 or 9. I probably need a couple more batters in it. I suppose if it's ODI cricket, you would take Rizwan or Babar as well. And Rizwan probably plays as your wicket keeper in that side, doesn't he? So that's pretty strong. But you've got Shoaib Akhtar as well. Shaheen Afridi, when he had functioning knees, would have been an automatic probably pick for me as well. I'm trying to think if there's any other batters. I need another. I think I'm missing an opening batter as well.
You can play Shahid Afridi there.
I probably would.
Just for the fireworks, right? Why not?
I always like it's funny. I always kind of think that players like Shahid Afridi that you can't set a field for, like, the power play is the best time for them to bat anyway. Do you know what I mean?
Like,
don't piss us
I think
out.
The Jasuria and Shahid Afridi sort of, power play hitting is what made the modern day format of attacking the first 10 overs, right? Okay.
Yeah, but sorry, go.
No. Next question I was going to ask you was, so it's the last ball of a game and you needed someone to hit a 6 to win the game. Okay. You can pick one of these guys. Virat Kohli, AB de Villiers, Shahid Afridi, Chris Gale, or Maxwell. You can pick one. AB de Villiers. Yeah, fair enough. I mean, that makes sense.
I think he
Okay.
can hit a 6 in more directions than anyone else on that list. And so he's not as dependent on what the ball is going to be. Whereas even some of the other guys there, I think they're a little bit more dependent on the ball. And Shahid Afridi is the only other one I would put that I'd be interested in, but he's more likely to miss it than AB de Villiers.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. I mean, if Gale's on 100, I feel like Gale will hit anything out of the park. But yeah, there's limitations.
But there are areas you can bowl to Gale. You can bowl very, very wide outside off stump to Gale because he doesn't move quickly. If you bowl very, very wide outside of off stump to AB de Villiers, he can still flick it over fine leg for 6, right?
Fair
so
enough.
If you're just saying who's the better pure 6 hitter, it's obviously Gale over anyone on that list, right? But if you're saying I've got one ball, right? AB de Villiers has the most options to hit a 6.
And who had the best Yorker? Bumrah, Malinga, Waqar Younis, Mitch Starc, or Freddie Flintoff?
So Bumrah, Malinga, who's the next one?
Waqar Younis,
Oh,
Mitch
Waqar
Starc, yeah, and Freddie Flintoff.
Malinga has the best Yorker of all time, but he has the best Yorker of all time because he puts side spin on the ball, and that meant that the ball would actually dip. So even when he doesn't bowl a Yorker, even when he bowls a full toss, it's still really, really hard to hit his deliveries. Whereas those other guys, if they miss their length, they're going to get absolutely smashed because they bowl traditionally. So Malinga's Yorker is automatically the best. Waqar Younis's Yorker for his time and place, was probably the best Yorker that could get you out no matter what the format is. Right? So I think if you tried to block out Malinga's Yorkers, you could probably block them out. But I think because no one had ever bowled reverse swing in the way that Waqar Younis did before, at that pace, peak Waqar Younis is about as good a bowler as that has ever existed. And so his ability to even break through a very set top order batter with a Yorker is unprecedented in cricket. Maybe Akhtar, but Akhtar's doing it purely with an extra 10 kilometers an hour of pace. He's not doing it as much with the movement and the accuracy and everything else. And Akhtar might have to bowl 4 bad Yorkers to get to his one magical Yorker. But the only other person I would add to your list is, I wouldn't have had Freddie Flintoff on my list. Joel Garner is the OG of Yorkers. And realistically, before Joel Garner, I don't think Yorker was considered a particularly great delivery, right? Whereas after Garner, it is.
Yeah, no, but I didn't watch him, so I saw a lot of Freddie Flintoff in the Ashes, and that's the first thing that came to my mind. Okay, so the first cricketer that comes to your mind when I say clutch.
I'm not a big fan of the word clutch.
Fair enough.
So, I don't know. For me, a clutch player is just someone who's incredibly skillful and knows their game, and so they're going to be good when there's no pressure on, and they're going to be good when there is pressure on because they know exactly what they're. There's a great story. I can't remember who told the story, and so I'll get it wrong. But actually, I remember it was there was a Dutch footballer, I think, and he kept running, and he scored a goal in like the 93rd minute of a game to win the game for the Netherlands. And I'm watching this game, and the commentator's like, he's so clutch that he stood up, and I was like, I think if you go through that game. And you go through every time they had a corner or a cross. My guess is this guy was running into the right position again and again and putting his head in the right area, but the kick was wide or the kick was short or a defender got in front of him or he slipped or someone fouled him and the ref didn't see it, right? And we call him clutch because he heads that goal in the 93rd minute. But why can he do that in the 93rd minute? Because he was professional all the way through and he'd done everything right. And in the 93rd minute, the only difference was instead of the ball being here, it was here, right? Mm-hmm. And he gets it. So if you want those sorts of cricketers, you'd be looking at, someone like Steve Waugh or Ricky Ponting or that sort of level of professional who is, or Virat Kohli, who's done everything they can to put themselves in the right position at the right time, right? That sort of MS Dhoni style of cricket. MS Dhoni, he's clutch. MS Dhoni was an incredible professional, right? He did everything he could. He thought about cricket in a way that no one else did. And then he specifically took those games to the last overs because he knew at the end of the game, he would still be thinking clearly because that's how he played his cricket. And he knew that other people would be far more emotional because that's how they played their cricket. He's not more clutch than anyone else. He's smarter than anyone else, right? So Michael Bevan theory, right? Michael Bevan was like, if we get to the end of the over, if we get to the end of the game, I'm still going to be thinking mathematically. I'm going to be like, okay, so there's a gap here. So if he bowls the ball here, that's my boundary. Okay, if I need to slog, this is my boundary. Okay, if there's a gap over here that I don't usually hit, but if I get this ball, I can go there. Whereas the bowler's at the other end going, oh my God, what do I bowl to Michael Bevan? Right? That isn't clutch. That's just a professional who's better than everyone else all the way through the game. But I've also given you about 5 names of players that you would like there. So you can have any of those.
Yeah. But also they keep their head in those moments as well, right? So that's a skill along with the professionalism.
But that's because they've always kept their head. Does that make sense? So
yeah, no, it makes sense.
So you say, oh, he's kept his head at the end of the game. Look, watch Michael Bevan off the first ball. Is he not keeping his head off the first ball? Right? Is MS Dhoni... Yeah. MS Dhoni is like the most genius, pragmatic person we've ever seen in cricket. Like, he's so pragmatic of like, oh, I'm not even going to try and chase this total because it's too high. It would be a waste of my precious bodily fluids to even try and chase this, right? So it's not that he's keeping his head at the end. It's that he always had his head. And not all cricketers have that, right? There are cricketers who do run high and low. You want to be a Kyron Pollard type player, an MS Dhoni type player to bat in the second innings. But those guys are not always as efficient or as well used to batting in the first innings, right? So you see a lot of players who are very good at batting in the second innings because it suits who they are as human beings, right? And so we go, that's clutch. Isn't it just as important to make runs in the first innings and set all these games up for your teams, right? That's not clutch. What? You're still going up against international bowlers. You still got to face Lasith Malinga bowling Yorkers at the death. You still got to do all those things. It's as clutch. It's just that we have... the cognitive biases that we have is only ever going to remember MS Dhoni and Michael Bevan and Steve Waugh in the 99 World Cup and all these sorts of things. Whereas actually, there are other players who are far more useful to their team at times than those players. I mean, they're all great players. I'm not having a go at them. But if you're as good as MS Dhoni in the first innings, right, as he is in the second innings, MS Dhoni is always going to be remembered more because he's going to be the person who hits the winning runs. You are not going to remember the batter who has set up the wins as often as you will the guy in the second innings. That's just how our brains work.
Fair enough. And that's true. I mean, honestly, it's like the football analogy, right? So if I think you were talking about Van Dijk, he scores to make it 2-1. There's someone who scores to make it 1-1, right? And that guy is equally as important. Otherwise, you don't win the game. So fair enough.
Yeah,
okay.
And he might have, and the other thing is, you might have been in a situation where he'd missed 4 goals in that game, right? And so if he misses, that last kick isn't straight to him and he just can't get to it, right? Does that mean he's not clutch anymore because the ball wasn't in the right area, right?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like MS Dhoni has been out there at the end of T20 games and lost them, and one-day games and lost them, right?
Many times.
Michael Jordan has... What's that famous Michael Jordan ad where he talks about all the last shots of a game he's taken and missed, right?
Yeah, it was something in the
hundreds. That is part of the narrative. You would
Yeah.
think he hit 100% of those shots, right? Whereas actually, he hasn't. And there are probably other players who are not on his level that haven't hit the shots in the same high level of games, who probably at the end of games were just as good a shooter. And why was he such a good shooter? Because some shooters would get tired by the end of the game, whereas Michael Jordan's athleticism allowed for him to play, despite the fact that all he ever did was party late at night and smoke cigars. But his athleticism meant that his jump shot form never went down. So he could shoot at the end of the games, whereas someone else who isn't as fit and professional and ready as him, maybe their hands slip a little bit. Maybe they don't jump as high as they used to at that stage, right? That's the professionalism.
100%. I mean, I think there's a Kobe Bryant quote where he talks about how he never felt nervous before a game because he felt like he'd prepared enough. And if he ever felt nervous, he realized that I hadn't done enough preparation. And so if he was prepared, he felt like whatever would come, he would know how to deal with it because he had done the work. So yeah, 100%. I agree with you. Okay. So first cricketer that comes to mind when I say aggression.
Sehwag.
Okay, fair enough. First cricketer that comes to mind when I say hard worker.
First cricketer comes to mind. Say it again, hard worker.
Yeah, hard worker. Not the most talented, but the guy just, he gets it done.
Shan Masood.
Fair enough. First cricketer that comes to mind when I say clown or joker, like a funny guy, just makes you laugh.
I don't know if any cricketers make me laugh.
We have some really funny guys. I mean, not on purpose maybe, but they're entertaining.
Yeah, I don't want to make fun of anyone who I laugh at because they're ridiculous. But although there's quite a few of those. Jesse Ryder always used to make me laugh.
Fair enough. Okay, so now I'm going to ask you the greatest ever. Okay, so who do you think is the greatest ever Pakistani batsman?
Yunus Khan.
All right, the greatest ever Pakistani.
Is it test or is it all format?
All format. So just one guy, you're like, Javed Mirdad. Fair enough. The greatest ever Pakistani bowler, this should be, who do you think?
The greatest Pakistani bowler is... I'm not sure there's much between Wasim Akram and Imran Khan. I think Imran Khan's probably a better test bowler and Wasim Akram was probably a better ODI bowler.
Wow. Okay. So, what is your favorite innings in a test match?
Favorite innings?
Any test match, just your favorite. It doesn't have to be the best innings. It's just your favorite, innings that in a test match.
So... there's a ridiculous innings that Angelo Matthews plays at Headingley to win a test match for Sri Lanka, where they were massively behind in that game. Mm-hmm. And the innings is so powerful. And he's batting with like Rangana Harath or something. And this goes back to the whole clutch thing of like, it was as good an innings as Kusal Pereira played or Ben Stokes played, weirdly at Headingley again. Yeah. But it was done in the third innings. Not the fourth innings, right? And so it's not remembered in the same way. But it was, I remember in that innings watching it and Alistair Cook, when you put the 9 players out on the boundary. And Alistair Cook got so fried that he wasn't always bringing the players back in at the right time, which allowed Angelo Matthews, like on the 5th ball, to hit a single. And all Rangana Harath had to do was like face one ball. And there were other times when Alistair Cook had the fielders in the wrong positions because he'd lost control of where he was putting his field. Because Angelo Matthews was just in control of that,
innings.
Of all of it, right? So that one sticks out. I remember Callis making 100 at the MCG to draw a test match where Shane Warne beat him about 1,000 times outside of stump. And I just thought the mental strength to be able to be beaten that many times and for it not to bother you at all. Like just not to even notice it.
Be phased.
Yeah. And the other one would probably be Virender Sehwag. I think, was it at Chennai? I can't remember which ground it was at, but that when India had to chase 300 or 400 or whatever it was against England after the Mumbai attacks, and Sehwag just comes out in the 4th innings and just detonates the chase and completely changes the game in about a minute and a half. Those 3 are the ones that probably stick in my mind the most.
And what is the greatest ball ever bowled for you? What is your favorite wicket?
Carl Hooper and Nasser Hussain. It's the one that rolls along the ground.
Oh, okay. I know which one you're talking about. Fair enough.
No, I mean, I think there's the Mitchell Starc hit a crack, didn't he, in against James Vince, which is basically an unplayable ball if you're bowling at 90 miles an hour and you hit a crack and there's not much you can do. So those, I think things where the pitch plays a big part. There's a ball that Ryan Harris bowls, which takes the top of, I want to say, Alistair Cook's bail, where he swung the ball in to Alistair Cook. And then it hits the seam and it seams away and takes the top of the
other
bail.
way.
That is the most perfect delivery in cricket, right? And so and we see that ball occasionally, but it very rarely hits the top of the bails as well. And against a test great. Like, do you know what I mean? So those are the ones that probably off the top of my head. I know there's some great Wasim Akram deliveries as well. Obviously the Shane Warne. I think Shane Warne's best ball is the Andrew Strauss one. He bowls behind his legs. And my favorite thing about that ball is that Andrew Strauss grew up watching Shane Warne on TV. He had played against him heaps of times. He gets bowled by that ball, and he has the same face that Mike Gatting does, which is, how's this physically just happened to me? How does this thing happen?
This
I
magic,
was standing here, and it still happened. And the difference with Gatting is, at least when it happened to Gatting, it was like Gatting had never seen anything like this before. So you've got the face
Shane
of someone
Warne was
who's
new.
like, yeah. Whereas Strauss is like, I have seen this before, and I still can't believe this has just happened.
Okay, so last question. What is your favorite commentary one-liner, like the greatest commentary one-liner in a game? You know, something like, for example, like by the barest of margins when England won the World Cup recently. What's your favorite one-liner?
It's kind of slightly more than a one-liner, but it's the Mike Gatting ball. It's the Shane Warne to Mike Gatting ball. So there was like a thing where you could become a member of the Bushrangers, the Victorian team, like a junior member, and you got all these posters. And one of the posters was just the writing of Richie Benaud's commentary of Shane Warne, and it was above my bed for years. And I'll try and get it right. I think I can remember it all off the top of my head. Mike Gatting has been bowled by the most amazing delivery by Shane Warne. And he has absolutely no idea what has happened to him. And then there's a pause. And then Richie goes, he still doesn't know. And it's like that perfect thing of Richie Benaud understanding that the pause made as much sense as anything else. And it's that extra delivery of like, he has no idea what's happened to him. That any commentator could say that line. But the ability to step back for a moment and realize that Mike Gatting 10 seconds later still doesn't know what has happened to him. I thought it was absolutely perfect. So that one has always stuck in my mind as a perfect moment of cricket commentary.
Perfect. I think that's a great place to leave it. Thank you so much, Jarrod, for sparing the time.
No worries. Thanks for having me on.
And hopefully see you again soon. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed our content, please do subscribe to our channel, and we will see you for the next podcast.